the personnel.
There was no ice in that when we first brought this out.
We're going to have the other member on the board here.
Commissioner Pappas is here. We're just waiting for Commissioner Tease.
Is Commissioner Tease?
Yeah, I think so. I didn't hear that he wasn't, so how are you? You did? You know, somebody else complained about. No, we don't do a better job. You know, I complained about that yesterday, so I'm surprised that.
So Eversource's next plan is to
Yeah.
cut down all the trees on Sword Terrace.
Oh, that would be good.
I thought usually we did personnel, like after everyone's left. Is that how we usually?
We do it. A new finance committee approval. So those are the only two changes.
Okay, thank you.
With those remarks, all those in favor of the motion to approve the agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Is there a motion on the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the Board of Public Works meeting of December 20, 2018.
Discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Public comments. Is there anybody who wishes to address the Board of Public Works? Apparently no one. Next, the presentation to be presented by Sanborn Head regarding the Four Hills landfill. Please step forward, Eric.
Good evening. My name is Eric Steinhauser, and I'm an engineer with Sanborn Head and Associates, and thank you for having me here tonight to talk about the work we're doing at Four Hills landfill. Just as a part of introduction, Sanborn Head has been working at this site for the city since about 2009, and various services related to the landfill in its design and operations. So this evening I'm going to talk about the upcoming construction that's proposed for the next line part of the facility, as well as some future planning for the city and their disposal needs. To bring everyone up to speed on what's going on at the site, just thought I'd give you a quick tour. This is an aerial photograph of Four Hills landfill. This big unit here is your closed unlined landfill. It was closed some years ago. There's also an old C&D landfill that's also unlined and closed. And this area is phase one of the first unit that was built that's under the current regulations for lined landfills. And this is the second phase. And the city is presently working in mostly in phase two, where the waste is being disposed. Some of it goes into phase one as well. Of interest, so these red lines represent the limit of waste that can be placed in those areas. Now, landfill liners, yes, sir.
This is Alderman Jetty. Could I interrupt you just? Could you orient us?
Sure. North is, so north is to the top left. Hollis Street is off the page on the very left side. So if you were, this is Hollis Street over here, and you would enter the landfill this way.
Okay, thank you.
To these red lines, they represent the limit of waste. There's a 500-foot setback from residential properties, and you can see there's residences over to on page right and on page bottom. When the facilities were first permitted and built, the liner system goes beyond those lines, and the city has to fill those areas with clean soil. And that's done with a barrier wall so that we can get height and you can optimize the amount of waste that goes into the facility. Other things at the landfill, there's a gas to energy facility, so landfill gas that's generated in the landfill is collected and brought and it's made into electricity at that facility. There's a compost area. Leachate, or the liquids that come through the landfill, are collected. They drain to this manhole box here, and that drains by gravity out to the city sewer system. The residents of the city as an area for them to drop off their recyclables and wastes. The operations for the landfill are located here. There's 6 detention basins on the site, and these dots here represent the groundwater monitoring systems that's out there. That's required by permit and tells us we're able to monitor the landfill by permit conditions. So tonight I'm going to talk mostly about phase 3, which would be on the south side of the landfill, and that's going to be the next lined area. Phase 3 was permitted back when phases 1 and 2 were. It just hasn't been built yet.
Just pointing it out for.
Phase 3 is right down here. Okay, and the limits of that, and I'll talk about this some more, are set so we're not going beyond the permitted limit of waste. We're not looking to do any waivers in that regard. And then the next phase, or phase 4, would be to find another spot on Four Hills where we could develop another lined landfill. And this would incorporate overfilling part of the phase 1 and phase 2 on the south here, as well as overfilling on the closed landfill. And when that landfill was originally closed, it was contemplated that that might happen, so there were some design aspects of that closure. And then, of course, the access road down the center here would also be lined to control the waste disposal. So phase 3 is an interesting project. It will be your first construction of a lined landfill at Four Hills since 2008. Right now, I showed you those red lines. There's a vertical barrier wall that a contractor comes in periodically to build that for the city so we can keep placing waste. Our design for phase 3 eliminates the need to build that, and I'll show you what that looks like in a few slides. Phases 1 and 2 and 3 was originally permitted that the liquids in the landfill, the leachate, would flow through the liner systems and out to that manhole I showed you. Back in the 90s when this was permitted, that was an okay thing by the state rules. That's no longer the case, so we eliminated liner penetrations with our design. So it's up to current rules. To do that, we have an active pumping system. So there's a sump, and I'll show you what that looks like real quick. So the leachate goes to a sump and gets pumped out, and it'll get pumped into the existing system you have in place now. One of the challenges of this was the groundwater. We have to have a separation between the top of groundwater and the bottom of the liner system. Many of those wells that you saw were in place so we can understand where groundwater is, and we can design the bottom of the landfill, and from that design, figure out how much capacity in the life of the landfill here. To do all this work, we have 2 stages of construction. The first one we'd like to do this year, and that's to kind of set the major parts of the facility. And then the second stage, which would be about 5 years out, would be to build the rest of the infrastructure to maximize the capacity at the landfill. So this is phase 3. The orientation's a little bit different. North is to the top right, south is to the bottom of the page. The red line represents the limit of the waste. That's and would tie exactly into where those concrete barrier walls are now. It's about a 6-acre landfill in total, and we would be looking at some significant earthwork to build the perimeter berms and get to the grade to build the landfill proper. And if you have questions, please interrupt me as I go. I just don't want to go too fast for you. Okay, one of the things to note is Pond 6, which is down here. There is a pond there now. Because because of the current design and the rule changes from AOT, that pond has been upgraded to meet the new rules. So it has a forebay, and the way the outfalls work are all up to current regulations. I'm sorry, yes?
And I didn't want to interrupt you as you go along. I usually like people to do their presentation. But while I'm thinking of it, so regulations change a lot. What happens if we get approved and we're kind of in the middle and the regulations change?
Sure, excellent question. Once you're approved and you have your permit, you're under those rules.
Okay.
If you wanted to make a change to the facility, depending on what the change is, if there's a rule change that is associated with that modification, then you'd have to follow the new ones. Because we're sending a different amount of water to the pond, we had to upgrade the rules on that.
So once we get it in our hand, we're golden.
And you have permits in hand.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And where is the pond that you?
Let me go back, I'm sorry. The pond is here. It's the same location Pond 6 is now. It's just we had to upgrade it to meet the current rules. Oh, one too far. So this is the same view you're looking at. The red lines here are the leachate collection pipes. So the liquid that comes through the waste, we collect in a pipe network, and it drains to the sump, which is down on this, represented this red dot here. There's a pumping network that pumps the liquid. It'll go up through what we call a riser building. So it's an actual structure where we'll have meters and be able to actually extract the pumps for maintenance, see how much flow is going through, do sampling if we need to. The pumping network will pump it all the way up to the top of the hill, where there'd be we would change from the force main or the pumping piping to a gravity main, and it would drain back in a pipe back to this area of phase 2, where there's already plumbing to bring that phase 3 liquid to the existing system. So originally when designed, the low spot was supposed to be in this area, but because of the groundwater, and I'll show you that in a minute, we had to flip the grades to meet the rules. And we're still trying to use as much of the existing infrastructure as we can without having to place a lot more pipe at the landfill. So as I mentioned before, we have to have, did you have a question, sir?
Yes, very quickly. We're taking, what, rainwater that flows into the thing and pumping it out of the...
So any water that comes in contact with waste, by rule, is considered leachate, and that has to be handled separately than stormwater. So when any water that's outside the limit of waste, that doesn't touch waste, is stormwater. Anything that falls within the limit of waste or on the waste itself, we collect as leachate, and they're handled very differently. This graphic here is the same grading plan we were looking at before. The blue lines represent the groundwater contours, and the green lines are computer modeling to see the difference between the top of that groundwater and the bottom of the landfill, which we have to have a 6-foot separation by rule. So we set up our grading plans to meet that rule. You know, it's been a wet year. Groundwater table has risen since we did this, so one of the conditions of the permit is to monitor groundwater and make sure we have that separation. So we're in the process, the city's been monitoring that. We have to take that monitoring through June of 2019 and show the state that we have the separation. So the grades might change a little bit to reflect if the groundwater has changed appreciably. So we make sure we have the separation. Yes, sir.
So, Alderman Jetty again. So, can you explain?
This line right here?
So the blue lines are showing the contour of the groundwater. Is that?
Yes. So you can think of it.
Groundwater is high or low, or
Yes, so the blue lines are like topography lines for groundwater. So what you have going on is the low of the groundwater is down here. That's why we put our sump there, because we can go down lowest and get the 6-foot separation. These curved lines here are just other 10-foot contour lines of the groundwater, with the highs being off on the edges on either side. So the water kind of flows from the edges into the landfill footprint and then down, so it's all flowing downward. The line up here, which,
I'm having trouble following your cursor. I'm not seeing it very well. Where's the low point again?
the low point's down here at the sump.
Okay, I see it now. Yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
And those are 10-foot contour lines as you go out from there. So all those yellow dots I showed on several slides ago, those monitoring wells, we gauge the groundwater elevation on a monthly basis. And it is how we come up with the groundwater contours here.
And is this within the, like if you go down that main road, so when you enter from West Hollis Street,
Mhm.
and you go to the back and you take a right, and you go along where the demolition area is, and then you take a left and you kind of go up. Where is that?
So let me do this. Let me show you, kind of answer that question here. So phase 3 is bottom right on the page.
So if you, Alderman Jettie, if you go all the way up the Hall Road and where we're currently working on the right, if you've
Which
been
is
there
here.
recently,
Yes.
if you, up behind that, it will be phase 3.
In this area here.
Okay.
So right behind phase 2 where we're currently working.
Okay. So that's
So
not
it'll
very,
be behind.
that's not very far from those houses on like the Pioneer. Or
Right. That's why, let me just go a little bit here. Actually, it was probably better back here. So those red lines, for phases 1 and 2, that represents the 500-foot from those houses. If you were to continue those lines down here, that's at the boundary for phase 3. So if I go to here, that yellow line, I'm sorry it's not darker to see as easily, but that yellow line is 500, that's the edge of waste that we would be allowed to place. And that's 500 or more feet from the residences. And that's a state requirement. In phase 4, which is right in the middle of the site, is well away from the 500-foot setbacks. So when it was originally permitted, phases 1, 2, and 3 were permitted as one package. We're modifying it to adjust for that vertical wall issue, which I'll show in a second, as well as for the groundwater table. So onto how we're going to build this. It's a pretty straightforward landfill construction project. It's some earthwork, and then we put down synthetic materials for barrier layers and drainage layers. It's multi-level thick. It's 2+ feet thick in total. And there'll be a perimeter berm around the outside, which would be constructed out of soil.
Eric, may I interrupt you just for a minute?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. The record should show that Commissioner Tease has arrived.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So stage 1, or what we're calling, would be built this summer. And that's that 6-acre area. It's within the 500-foot setback. There's just over 1 million yards of airspace for disposal capacity in that area based on where the bottom of the landfill is and a 3-to-1 side slope from our edge of our berm, right, that box that we would make. And then based on your current disposal, your waste stream coming in and the compaction efforts we're able to give it, it's about 6.5 years of capacity there. About 5 years out, after you start filling it, we would go to stage 2. And what stage 2 does is build more soil berm along the outside. We'll place more liner material so that all the waste would stay inside that limit of waste. That's this dashed line you see vertically here. We'll place the liner such that all the waste is always staying inside that limit of waste where it should be. And you get another 200 and almost 80,000 cubic yards, or another 3.5 years of capacity. The construction of that would just be mostly the soil berm and some more liner system, but not a lot, not as extensive as the first construction we're going to do this year, which has the pumping systems and all the piping that goes, and the pond that goes with it. Yes, sir.
Quick question. Commissioner Ackerman, 1 million cubic feet lasts 6.5 years, but 80,000 lasts 2.5?
Cubic yards.
Cubic yards.
Yeah, and that's because as you start a new landfill, your first lifts are placed looser because you don't want, we call it select waste. We got to be protective of the liner systems. You don't get as good a compaction in the early years just because you don't have the thicknesses of waste. And as we go longer, you're getting settlement of the waste. You're actually, you put waste in and then it settles down, so you're getting some of that capacity back. So we look at what we call an airspace utilization factor. We do some math based on your tonnages that you bring in and the historic placement that we were able to see. So every time you open a new cell, your compaction isn't as good, and as you go through the years, it improves over time.
And from stage 1 to stage 2, there's no overlap. It's continuous. So the 6.5 years plus the additional
Correct.
years is going to, okay, thank you.
Yep. Yes.
And all these phases are going to be included in the permit that we're going to receive?
So the permit, the original permit included phases 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
The way the state works, if when you're ready to build the next phase, there's another application for construction. It's called a Type 2 permit. Phases 1 and 2 are built, they're active. Phase 3 we didn't need yet, and so you don't build what you don't need. But capacity is running out in the landfill, so we need to get it built. And to go to the, to get permission for construction, there was another permit application to modify the original one. So that's what we did. We prepared an application over a year ago, went to the state that showed the modifications that we're doing to bring everything up to current code. Because we are modifying it, we had to go through alteration of terrain with the Department of Environmental Services as well. So all those permits were in, all those permits are in hand. So according to the state, we're ready to go to construction. It's just local approvals to go forward.
And then we will also be working on now getting the permitting done of phase 4, because that's not done yet. We don't have phase 4 permitted.
Yep.
We only had 1, 2, and 3 permitted, so.
Yes.
So if it's thanks for the clarification. It sounds like they switched their rule, and I understand that they have to. So if we get 1, 2, and 3, like that's what our permit's for, how many years will that buy us?
Phase 3 gets you an additional 10 years. I don't remember how much we have left right now.
4 to 5.
Yeah. So you got 4 to 5 years left if you didn't do anything. Phase 3 gets you another 10. You need overlap between phases because, like I said before, you want to select the waste that goes on the new liner systems because you want to be protective of the materials you spend a lot of money to construct. And you want overlap between phases so that you can properly remove your machinery, you have good operational control. So most of our clients are looking for a year overlap at a minimum. So again, you don't want to build too far in advance, but you want to have operational security, if you will, on how you operate your landfill.
Brief follow-up question, Commissioner Ackerman. Mr. Steinhauser, looking out beyond phase 3, phase 4, how many cubic square yards?
I'll get into that
Fair enough.
in a moment. So what's nice about phase 3 design is that you build one project now, in 5 years, we build another project, and the city doesn't have to deal with these periodic vertical wall construction, because we would build that perimeter extension in one construction season. Right now, they have to put in these vertical barrier walls as they go, and it's disruptive, and it delays, and it hampers how they can do work. This part of our job was to get you as much space as we could and make it operationally positive for the operators. One more slide, and then we'll get to phase 4. So at the end of the day, when phase 3 is filled, it's going to look like this. And just to note, on the bottom here, you see there's a lot of grading, and it stops because it goes. This is the area where just clean soil is placed on the liner system, and part of the job was to eliminate having to do that. So there's earthwork to build a berm around phase 3, but we're not building this extra liner system we don't need to do. And so at the end of the day, this is what a topographic map should look like when phases 1, 2, and 3 are filled, some 10 or 15 years from now. Yes, sir.
Alderman Jetty, so I've got a couple of questions. What is the liner built out of?
I brought show and tell materials. So in New Hampshire, the rules are to have a geomembrane geomembrane material. So I have two types to show. Two different manufactured materials for that. This is a 60 mil thick, high density polyethylene material. That's what every site in the country and internationally uses. It's textured. It's for slope stability issues, so we don't get sliding of the material. So there's a primary geomembrane and there's a secondary. So when this gets built, they'll do earthwork to grade the site to where it needs to be. We'll place a 6-inch thick layer of a low permeability, very dense material. On top of that will go the first layer of this plastic material. On top of that will go a drainage material. And this is it's kind of like carpet with a drainage net in between. The textile helps, if you were to put it up against that frictioned plastic, it holds very tight. That allows water to move through it, so we can collect it in the sumps. On top of that is the primary geomembrane, and then another composite for the leachate directly from the landfill. And then there's a 2-foot thick sand layer, 18-inch thick sand layer above that, and then waste is placed above that. In the sump area, we have another material, kind of a belt and suspenders, and that's in a plastic bag. This will get kind of messy. That's called a geocomposite, geosynthetic clay liner. So that's a textile like on that drainage material, but inside of the textile is a very fine clay called sodium mount or bentonite. We place that in the sump as an extra precaution because that's where you have your thickest amount of liquid standing on top of that. If there was to be a hole in one of these membranes, that would swell up and prevent water from going through. That's the whole purpose of that piece of material. So the construction is a big earthwork job with some specialty geosynthetics that gets placed. All that stuff is very monitored, very controlled, and we will be writing a pretty thick report that documents all the stuff that goes in, which is per permit as well.
So when you say 6 inches, is it the same stuff? This stuff looks pretty thin.
Yeah, 6 inches of soil is the first layer.
Oh, okay.
And then on top of that, we build these layers going up.
Okay. And this material is safe? This material itself is not a source of contaminant?
No, sir. These materials have been used for, I've been doing this almost 30 years. They're tried and true, tested. Every lined landfill has them. Your landfills that are closed have similar materials on them in the cap system. Slightly different, but because the performance criteria is a little bit different, but they're essentially the same makeup.
question unrelated to this, but when you said your estimates as to how long this would last, you know, how long the landfill would last, in terms of years, this seems like a pretty silly question. I think I know the answer, but the estimate regarding, in terms of years is based upon how much stuff we put in there, right? I mean,
Correct.
You're basing that based upon our current,
Your current and projected waste stream. So,
so if we do anything to increase that,
your utilization would drop. You would have less years. So you've taken about 80,000 tons of waste a year. So if you went to 40,000 tons a year, you get twice as much life. If you went to 160 tons a year, you'd get half as much life.
so if we were somehow able to reduce the amount of waste that we're putting there, that would extend the life of the landfill.
Yeah. And part of it has to do with what types of waste and how well you can compact it. There's a number of factors, but the tonnage is probably the biggest, you know, nut to crack there. So, and that's what, it's an estimate. You know, is it 9.5 years? Is it 10.5? We can only project. We can only project as an estimate.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on phase 3? Because I'll jump over to phase 4, which will be pretty quick. Oh, yes, sir.
One question on the pumping station that you're planning on building to pump that leachate, I guess you said up. What does that run on? Electricity?
It's electricity.
It is electricity?
Yep. So part of the project would, there's a power pole not too far. Was it Eversource? Yeah, Eversource would have to put some new poles in to run for overhead, and then we'd run below grade conduits to the that pump house.
And that is what, an automatic on-off system?
Yes, good question. So the way the sumps work, there's a submersible sump that's put into the bottom. We actually slide it down a large diameter pipe. These pumps are specialty made for leachate environments. There's a number of sensors associated with the pump that reads the water level in the sump. So when the water level gets to a certain level, the pump kicks on. And when it gets down to another level, it kicks off. So the pump cycles. It doesn't run 24/7. And depending on how much waste there is, how dry the waste is, how much rain has happened, the more rain and snow melt you get, the more liquids are going to come to the sump, the more pumping there would be. The drier the time, maybe the drier the waste, it doesn't pump as much. But it's all automated, and it will be, the operations staff can see the operations of the pump and when it's working. If there are, there's another level that says if the level gets too high in the sump, that maybe the pump hasn't kicked on, there's warnings that go off so the operations staff can pull the pump, put down a replacement, or repair it and make sure things are working. Yes, sir.
Alderman Jettie again. Has any thought been given to producing our own electricity to operate that, you know, with solar or whatever?
We haven't for this project. It's a possibility. It's a little bit outside my expertise, but sometimes it's cheaper. Like you make electricity at your gas plant, and that gets sold. Oftentimes it's cheaper to buy it than to use it. If you're going to make electricity, it's sometimes better to sell it and then buy it off the grid versus use it internally. I don't know all the economics behind that, but if that's something the city wanted to look into, we could help direct you to people that can do just that. But we didn't look at self-powering those pumps. They're not real high energy use pumps.
Thank you.
All right. So phase 4 would be, like I said earlier, overlying the large unlined closed landfill, overlying a portion of the phases 1 and 2, and that application, we're in the process of preparing and finishing off the design work for that. This would be a new landfill, so it'd be another new permit for that facility, not a modification like Phase 3 was. So we're preparing all aspects that the state would want. So it's the engineering design, it's the hydrogeologic environment around it, the stormwater design that goes along with that, and all that stuff is in motion right now that we're putting together. Our estimates right now of the volume here is 3 to 4 million cubic yards of space. So it's, if you've been to the landfill and you go down that road, there's quite a valley that you're into. And so this is overlapping on that valley. So that's all I had prepared on Phase 4, but I'm happy to address questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Certainly.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Mr. Stenhauser, 3 to 4 million cubic feet, did you equate that to longevity or time based upon the 80,000 tons per year?
Yeah, so it's cubic yards, which is 27 times bigger than a cubic foot. So if the one, we figured 15 years? 40 to 50. Yeah, 40 to 50 years.
On top of the
Yeah.
10 years, 4 to 5 years with a 1-year overlap? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're in good shape for the foreseeable.
Yeah. One of the goals was to look forward ahead enough so the city has capacity secured. And that's, you know, we try to find a spot on site that we didn't have to buy property, we didn't have to worry about a lot of the issues that we've had before with setbacks. And this is just actually happens to be a very nice spot to put that.
We do still need to get this permitted, though. It
Yeah.
is not, so.
And that permitting process could take.
It'll take years.
Years.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
could take 3 to 4 years to get this permitted.
And you're saying that were Phase 4 to be permitted with the other phases, it would altogether add 40 to 50 years?
Yes. Yes.
Is it going to be harder to do a brand-new Phase 4, or were the other phases going to be more difficult to do as far as the infrastructure we have to put in as far as permitting goes?
So Phase 4 is not hard to develop. Part of the infrastructure already exists because Phases 1 and 2, that liner system is meets current rules. So we don't actually have to line up on Phases 1 and 2. It's the places that don't have liner where in between the two landfills, and then up on the side slope of the closed landfill, we'll have to do a modified liner system to bring it up to rule. Because the cover system is a less restrictive design than a liner system, as you could imagine. So there's actually like 3 different types of liner systems that need to go in place here. But that's just laying different types of plastic or soil. So it's not a complicated construction. It would be built in phases because of how big it is. You wouldn't want to build a whole thing and manage all that liquid and water. Part of the design is to how would we build it so that operations can operate efficiently. The infrastructure for leachate lines are nearby, so we would have another sump and pump system, but that's a pretty short run compared to what Phase 3 has. There's some other modifications that have to happen on Phases 1 and 2 because there's gas extraction infrastructure. We'd have to modify that to make it work. Again, that's not complicated, but it needs to be permitted and designed, and that's all the stuff that we have in play right now. So there's a lot of pieces to it. It's not hard. The permitting timeframe takes a while because the state reviews everything, and the state is very thorough, and it takes a little while. So you need to start early so you can get the stuff lined up. It'd be good for you guys to have this on the shelf. It's permitted, so if you had to go back, you can modify what you needed to, but you have the permit, and so that locks you in. And that's really the nut we want to crack early is we know what the rules are now. Get that permitted. We don't know what they're going to change in the future. So get your capacity when you can.
Good answer, thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Yes, sir.
Alderman Jettie?
The leachate that you mentioned, what happens to that after it gets pumped up to the top of the hill and then flows down? Where does it go and what happens to it?
Sure. So all the leachate from phases 1, 2, and 3, and also 4 in the future, there's a gravity sewer line on site that leads to the to a pump station off of West Hollow Street, and that goes to your wastewater treatment plant and is treated as sewage there.
It's pumped through the Trestle Brook pump station to the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, so it doesn't get treated on site, it gets treated at the
The wastewater.
wastewater plant.
Correct.
And could I follow up with another?
Yes, of course.
So it sounds like 1, 2, and 3 are a lot more complicated than 4. Sounds like there's a lot more to do.
It's different complications. 3 is, again, 3 is permitted. We just need to go to construction. There are nuances to every project, but 3 isn't all that complicated to build or to operate. 4 has some other infrastructure that needs to be modified for it to be constructed and operated. But again, it's not overly complicated to go forward on that.
So do we need 3? I know that 4 has not been permitted, so that's still a question. But if 4 were to be permitted, could we skip 3? Are we going to need 3 before?
I can answer that real quickly. Jeff, LaFleur, Superintendent Solid Waste. We're at a point where there's not much capacity left in phase 1 and 2. If we wait for phase 4 to get permitted, that could take us 2 years. We still have to do all these meetings. We have to do public hearing. We have to go through DES to get that done. We just don't have the time to make that happen. And just so you guys are aware, we're already out to bid for this project. We're getting our bids back in February 20th. We're gonna go over the bids and you'll be seeing a contractor being selected by the 25th at the next BPW. That's how quick we need to move this.
Thank you.
And also, just to add to what Superintendent LaFleur just said, phase 3 will give us some more, because we're gonna tie it into phase 2, that gives us some additional airspace by marrying the 2 together, so to speak. Airspace that we don't have in phase 2 right now that we'll have once phase 3 is built.
That's all I had.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening.
Next on the agenda is engineering. Mr. Dukran is here, I know. Item A is tabled from October. And located in the right-of-way at 1 Hutchinson Street to remain in its current location.
Good evening, Steve Dukran, City Engineer. Just to review what we had brought the last time, that was October 25th meeting. This fence at 1 Hutchinson has been installed within the city's public right-of-way. If you review the memo, you'll see we talked about, according to the homeowner, they were misled by the fence company as to where the right-of-way line was, and thus we have to fence that's violating a city ordinance. There's a city ordinance that says that any fences or walls or anything of that nature that's to be installed approximate or abutting a street, that has to be brought to the city engineer's office for review with regards to lines, grades, essentially the location. So that wasn't done. And secondly, the same ordinance chapter, a different section, talks about if there is a fence or an obstruction, an encroachment within the right-of-way, that has to be approved by the Board of Public Works, but only if safety needs are met. And in this case, that's not the case. This was brought to our attention by the neighbor of what Hutchinson complaining about the side distance problem that resulted from putting the fence too close to the roadway and blocking their driveway, especially when they're trying to back out. So I did speak at that meeting, talking about the problems we have with this, and as a result, you tabled it, asking for the opportunity to review it again. In the meantime, the division wanted to look to see whether there's a compromise that can be met by just simply adjusting the fence. So we looked at, if you were in the driveway and trying to back out, at what point do you start to see an improved sight distance, something that seems reasonable? And we determined that if you bring back that corner of the fence 3 feet in and angled it to where there's a gate along that length of fence, angled to that gate point, you will have an improved sight distance. And it wouldn't be ideal. It would only give that driver backing out the ability to see more. That wouldn't meet engineering standards. When we look at sight distance regarding a traveling vehicle, as we look at the speed of the vehicle is traveling, and for instance, at 20 miles an hour, a vehicle needs 155 feet to stop when there's something that they can collide with, whether it's another vehicle, a stopped vehicle that is, or a pedestrian in the street, and so on. And how do you come up with that 155 feet is that there's a certain amount of time you need to react. According to engineering standards, you take 3 seconds to perceive the issue and then to react to it. You're still traveling within those 3 seconds, and then you have to take a certain amount of time to decelerate and stop. And you add that distance to travel, and that is 155 feet at a traveling speed of 20 miles an hour. Higher speeds, obviously, more distance you would need. So certainly, as it is, it doesn't meet that 155 feet. Even if we were to bring the fence back by 3 feet, it still would meet, but it'll be an improved situation. So we approached the owner at 1 Hutchinson and asked them that could they consider bringing back the fence in, either angling it for 3 feet in or moving the whole thing 3 feet in, that whole length. And they stated that they will not be interested in doing so, that they need to keep their fence in the same location. Our position hasn't changed with regards to the safety issue in this matter, but I believe the decision is up to the board.
Commissioner Pappas.
Just a couple of questions, and just to see if some of the information I have is wrong, just generally in the city. So I was kind of surprised that, is this correct, that there's no general X number of feet setback throughout the city? It's different, is it different from neighborhood to neighborhood, ward to ward, residential areas, house to house?
Okay, I can answer that. So we have the public right-of-way varies throughout the city. The old right-of-ways accepted by the city, sometimes they were in the 36-foot range, sometimes 30 feet, 40 feet. Years going back, we started to standardize that at a 50-foot requirement. So all the subdivisions going back from, say, the 70s, 80s, we started to see a standard 50-foot right-of-way for a residential street. Now, your street could be located anywhere within that 50-foot. It is common practice for the street to fall directly along the center line, and therefore the distance between the edge of pavement and the right-of-way line is pretty standard now. But you do have streets that are maybe favored toward one side or the other. But so the answer is, it's not, you wouldn't find it as a standard throughout the city.
Do you have a general, is there like a minimum, maximum range?
So let's look at the 50-foot right-of-way. So a typical subdivision is a 28-foot wide road. So that means that the edge of the street is 14 feet from the center line. And now the remaining distance will be 25 minus 14, so about 11 feet.
Now, does that also apply when people put shrubbery up and the shrubbery grows out?
Typically, no. I mean, we allow people to landscape the right-of-way, what's left, put lawns and landscaping and so on, as long as they don't impede the site distance. And we identify locations often, and it's brought to our attention to, that there's an overgrown shrub, and we will approach the homeowner to trim the shrub, or maybe take it upon ourselves to do so.
I think, Commissioner Pappas, your question was if there were shrubs in the right-of-way that create a site distance issue, would the same apply?
Correct.
Yeah, so, and the answer is yes. If there was a site distance issue caused by anything, then yes.
Because I'm finding that I've complained about, I can think of a few different site issue for bushes, and people get all upset about bushes, and to me, I don't like fences. I really don't like site distance issues and intersections, but sometimes I think a fence is worse than, is less intrusive than a shrub. Do you know offhand if there were shrubs there before the fence was there? Because I remember seeing pictures before of shrubs.
There were, yeah.
The shrubs were, if the shrubs were in the fence, and I don't like to go asking people because I'd rather have it out in the public and have my questions, you know. Do you know offhand?
Yes, we know. We have, you know, pictures from the past where there was not really shrubs, I think overgrown, you know, brush.
But were they there where the
trees.
fence was? I guess that's what I couldn't tell. I looked at the pictures, and I drove by several times, and I saw the fence, and I couldn't tell if the overgrown, it almost looked like, from the picture, arborvitaes, but I couldn't tell, were like, I couldn't tell if it was where the fence was from the picture. Or do you know?
There were, according to what I saw, there were overgrown vegetation, probably in the location where the fence is.
So the neighbors that were there would have had to deal with the site issue from the vegetation anyway?
I would say they might have. We have no way of saying for sure.
Right, and I know that different years it
Right.
grows differently. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Tease.
Mr. Dukran, I have two questions for you and then possibly one for Attorney Bolton. In the materials we reviewed, there was reference to, without anybody accepting any wrongdoing, there was reference to maybe someone being misled on the website. Has that material been updated to be, in your opinion, satisfactory, so it's clear?
I think it has. It is the material is put on the website by the Community Development Division. And I think, if I remember correctly, it might have said something like no permits required for fences. I think, except if it's taller than a 6-foot fence. I think that's what was there.
Number two, have we communicated the Gate City fence, or will we communicate with them, you know, just to make it clear kind of going forward? We've been doing it for a long time and doing a good job for a long time.
Right. So we're in the midst of trying to put together better documentation regarding fences and so on, and it's part of our plan to reach out to all the fence companies to let them know, have them abide by existing rules and any new rules.
And Gate City Fence has had to move fences out of the city right-of-way recently, so they're well aware of that issue, just to be clear.
And then my last question is, if we were to agree to the compromise that you outlined earlier, I just remember Attorney Bolton bringing to light, you know, would we be liable for any accident or anything that may occur?
Well, like a lot of things in the law, the answer is maybe. You're taking a risk. If the automobile is going 60 miles an hour down this street, I don't think the fact that vision is obscured to this driveway is going to be the big issue. Big issue is that the automobile is going too fast for the condition, and the collision might have happened, in all likelihood would have happened because of the speed, not because of the sight distance. I will say in an appropriate case, yes, the city would be liable. I analogize it to, we don't catch every speeder on our roadways. Someone speeds, we don't know anything about it, it's not our fault. If we go out and affirmatively give someone permission to drive down Main Street at 70 miles an hour, it's going to be on us. The fact is, as Steve said before, it's quite clear the ordinance provides that if you're going to build a fence or build a building, plant landscaping that would grow high enough to impact sight distances, you're supposed to consult the engineer. The engineer will identify where the edge of the right-of-way is, will identify the proper grade and other things that may impact sight lines and other issues that would be relevant to the engineering of a fence or other structure, and do all that at no charge. Gate City Fence should have known this. There's no question. They're the experts in the field here. They should have known. All they had to do was consult the city engineer. There's a minimum time that the city engineer has to respond, in fact, 15 days. It's not a long time. They should have known. They are the people that got hired to apply their expertise to the situation these homeowners wanted done. In my mind, they failed to exercise good professional judgment in that regard. And if these homeowners bear any expense because of their failure to do what was right, that's where their remedy lies. Go after the fence company. But I can't in good conscience advise you to ignore the law and to put the city treasury at risk. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Bolton? Mr. Ackerman?
Well, sure. I think I have in front of me an ordinance called Chapter 285, Streets and Sidewalks. It was provided to me prior to the meeting. We talk about, in the editorial by the city engineer, mention of right-of-way. But I don't see any mention of that within the ordinance. Am I missing something, Mr. Bolton, anywhere?
Well, abutting a public street means the same thing.
Okay.
And there's reference to abutting a public street.
Abutting street. And can you, where do we look at that?
In section 285-7,
Okay?
no person shall proceed to erect or make any alteration in the location or grade of any fence, wall, lawn, or building, a part of which is to abut a public street.
I had an opportunity to drive by the property. I thought the fence was well-constructed. The property looked very, very good. I thought the homeowner had done a great deal of due diligence. I do agree with you that I think that if we're going to hold these quote-unquote experts I don't know what the right word is, responsible or whatever, maybe we ought to think about moving forward to having them go through a permitting process, so we don't have this type of situation ever happen again to a resident of the city of Nashua.
And we're working on that now.
Well, I'd work a little faster if we could, possibly. I still haven't heard precisely on 1 Hutchinson, what the right-of-way is in terms of distance from the curb to the thing. I've heard 11 feet, I've heard 15 feet, I heard 14 feet. I went out, I measured it, it's 62 and a half inches, so, from the edge of the curb. And I rode around the neighborhood, I saw other properties where the fences are right on the street. Granted, they're not 6 feet up, they might have been 3 or 4 feet, and it was a chain link fence, it's around the corner, and there's a complete bush there. So I think we gotta do the right thing by the residents of Nashua, and I don't wanna make this a hardship case for them, but I do agree with your comment. If they've done something inappropriate, not the resident, but the people that did it, and the board doesn't agree to allow the fence to stand with it where it is currently, they might have some recourse against Gate City Fence. I do agree with that, but I thought it looked safe. I thought they did all their due diligence. I thought that the neighbor, as I understood it, was on the property the day of the installation. And I thought they were consulted between resident, and also with the folks from Gate City Fence. And they, at that time, didn't seem to have a problem with the location of the PVC fence.
Commissioner Ackman, I certainly don't intend to argue anything, but I'm not so much worried about the neighbor who may have assumed the risk when they indicated that they had no problem, you should go forward. I'd be more worried about exposing someone who wasn't involved at all and happens to be driving down the street and ends up colliding with someone exiting the neighbor's driveway. That person, and let's just hope it never happens, and let's hope if it does happen, no one is injured badly, but in the event that someone in that car, third party, not the neighbor, is badly hurt, it is not going to matter if you let this occur, knowing what you know. We're going to get sued. The jury is not going to be very sympathetic to us. And that's the exposure that I'm most concerned with. Now, other fences in other places that got done without coming to your attention, I'm not saying we have no risk there, but I'm saying we have less of a risk. You certainly have more risk when you affirmatively allow something that's been brought to your attention.
Do you want an answer to that question as to how far the right-of-way goes from the curb? Do you have that, Mr. Duke?
Yes.
You know, Steve?
Thank you. And I would apologize if I didn't answer it clearly. I was, just to be clear what I was doing, I was answering a general question posed by Commissioner Pappas. What is defined as a right-of-way and what could it be? In this case, it's about 11 feet from the edge of the street.
Okay. With regards to the fence that's encroaching upon, I believe it's along, is it?
Huey.
Then is the front of the house. The fence in question is on the other street.
It's on Huey Street.
Huey Street.
Yes.
Is, with the exception of that distance from the edge of the property, the resident there to the other section beyond the gate, is the rest of the fence in agreement with the right-of-way?
Yes, it's almost exactly on the right-of-way, and that's kind of confusing to us. How could that fence be put where it should be, and the rest of it is bumped out into the street?
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions, comments? Commissioner Pappas?
And I hate to keep bugging the city attorney about those questions, but you said fences, but when people have concerns about sites regarding overgrown bushes, because I've had many more concerns about that. Before you put bushes, you don't go to the Board of Public Works, so would the city be liable if we ignore concerns of residents of stuff items that are in that right-of-way? Which again, I know that it's different from neighborhood to neighborhood, but.
if brush grows naturally, and I don't want to speak too much for Public Works, but my general understanding is if it grows naturally and then becomes a site distance, site obstruction issue, and people call it to the attention of the Board of Public Works or the Public Works Division, a crew will go out and trim it back and make sure it doesn't present a hazard. If someone intends to plant a hedge of 8-foot-tall arborvitaes within the right-of-way, this same ordinance would require them to go to the city engineer and get it delineated where the edge of the right-of-way is, and we'd be in the exact situation as we are with the fence.
Okay, and just one more question, if I can. So, because it's more, this one's more of a process question, so it might be to the director. So in the past, usually what happens is when we get site issues, I think we usually go to code first, and then sometimes code will try to work with people, and I want to be sure that we're consistent and fair with fences and brush, and as a driver, and I'm kind of an old lady driver, that people probably get mad at me, I actually find brush more difficult as a site issue than a fence, but, so, I don't know if you know the answer to the process or the director does.
So the first
but
thing.
it involves two, it seems like it involves two departments, and that's where
Sure.
I've been frustrated in the past.
Right, so the first thing would be for us to go out and do an inspection. So an engineer would go out and see if there's clearly a site distance problem. If there is a site distance problem, we would ask, if it were bushes, we would ask that the bushes be trimmed back. And if that didn't happen, then we would have code enforcement, we'd get code enforcement involved, and then they would go out and try to work with the resident to make that happen.
And then if they drop it and the site distance issue persists, where does the resident go?
It depends, have we determined that there's definitely a site distance issue? Because code would get involved in the removal at that point, if we determine there was still a site distance issue after the trimming.
So the people have to just keep going back, even though it's somewhat of a...
It would be in code enforcement's hand at that point, correct?
I can
Not that far.
I can add a little bit to this. There are two issues going on. In this case, you've got a fence that actually is in the right-of-way. It's not on the unencumbered property of the homeowner. In the zoning ordinance, which the Code Enforcement Department enforces the zoning ordinance, there's a provision for setting back a fence or shrubbery or anything else. If you imagine two streets intersecting, so you got one street going here and one street going here, the zoning ordinance says you measure back from the corner 25 feet in each direction, draw a line between those 2 points, and this triangle has to be free from any site obstruction. That's primarily what code is out there enforcing. When we have something in the right-of-way,
Can I
it
just is- interject something there, because what he's, I think, saying is that triangle might not be in the right-of-way.
exactly.
Back 25 feet. So code is kind of enforcing, I suppose, within, but beyond the right-of-way when there's a site problem.
Because that's a zoning issue. And they would probably first approach the homeowner or the property owner, if it, whether it's commercial or residential, they would approach the property owner and say, okay, you've got a problem, you're in violation, you have to move your fence back or remove that shrubbery or whatever it is. If they don't comply, we would enforce it with a court action. And we'd probably go to Superior Court and seek a mandatory injunction to have that homeowner clear that area. One, because it presents an unsafe condition, and two, because it violates the zoning ordinance. And the homeowner can plead their case in court. They could go to the zoning board of adjustment and seek a variance and say, well, we ought to be allowed this for whatever reason they have, or say that the bush is low enough you can see over it, or whatever argument they want to present. Public Works probably doesn't get involved in that case much at all. They may bring it to the attention of code enforcement, may bring it to my attention, and we'd go from there, but it probably doesn't get to this board because it's not really a Public Works issue in that regard, and there's a more direct way to take care of it. In the situation where you've got something in the public right-of-way, the division could just go out there, remove the fence, remove the shrubbery, whatever. I think in the interest of harmony in the community, they speak to the property owner first. They don't just go and bulldoze the fence. But that's the remedy the city has in that situation. And in this case, the property owners, quite not unexpectedly at all, seek to say, well, who do we have to talk to allow us to keep the fence where it is? And you're the board, and that's what we're doing this evening.
Thank you.
Commissioner Tees.
For clarification, Attorney Bolton, is the fence on the city's property or in the right of way? I want clarity for that.
Well, this gets complicated and it's not understood by everyone. But in the typical case, there are some exceptions in other situations, but in the typical case, and I think this case is typical, what the city owns in our streets is not the fee interest, the total ownership of that property. What the city has is a type of easement called a right-of-way. And so this strip of land, the city has the right to maintain it and construct appropriate facilities on it to allow for vehicular and pedestrian traffic. The actual underlying ownership, so when oil is discovered in that strip way underground, to the center of the right-of-way, it belongs to the property owner on this side of the street, and to the center of the right-of-way, it belongs to the property owner on the other side of the street. And
But to do an oil well, they would need Steve Dukran to approve.
we'd get into a big discussion about that, because if the oil well is in the center of the street, that interferes with the vehicular traffic. Even on the edge of the right-of-way, and where the fence is now, certainly, it's interfering with pedestrian traffic, because the pedestrian traffic is now going to be forced to walk in the area that is designed for vehicular passage. So, in this case, out to the center line of the right-of-way, which may or may not be the center of the pavement, but in most cases it is. But sometimes the pavement is more to one side or more to the other side, as I think Steve explained, but most of the time down the middle. The city has the right to keep that space clear. Beyond the right-of-way, the city has only what it can do through zoning and other police action enforcement type of things. So Board of Aldermen can pass ordinances that regulate certain things that the state has allowed it to regulate. We have that property interest, that easement interest in the right-of-way, which allows us to keep it clear.
Commissioner Tees.
So, using the example that you, or analogizing your example to a setback. So I put a fence on my yard, but I didn't keep the right setbacks from my neighbor's yard?
Well, in most cases, there is no setback under our zoning for a fence, but
But if, let's say I put the fence on my neighbor's yard, I might be forced to move it because it's on the wrong. You just gave me that.
Right.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Director, as you had articulated earlier, there was a dialogue that occurred between the city and the resident at 1 Hutchinson, and they chose not to go with the compromise, correct?
That's correct.
And the compromise was simply to potentially take that fence and move it back 3 feet, or angle it over by the homeowner's property. Is that what I understood?
Yes, and
Of
Engineer
what
Duke could
Ms.
probably
Ducrain.
speak
So,
more to that, but yes,
Okay.
Andy Patrician, Assistant Director Andy Patrician, and Lauren Byers met with the
fair enough. I think
homeowners.
that's
I didn't.
great effort on their part. I appreciate that. So, by virtue of now it coming before the board,
Mhm.
that if we say the fence can't be where it is, then the fence would go back to 11 feet is off of the street. Is that an accurate statement? Okay, so perhaps, knowing that there's a liability, or possibly from the city, for the safety of the greater good of the community, I might recommend that the department go back and ask the residents, is that their final decision on the compromise offer? Because either way, I do believe, as pointed out by Attorney Bolton, that the people that put the fence up should have known the rules and regulations. They've been in the city for 50-plus years. That ultimately their recourse is going to be against them, but it's either going to be 6 feet or 3 feet. So before we vote, my recommendation, if possible, would be simply to ask the homeowner, are they willing to reconsider the compromise before we vote?
Can we just make some points to some
Well,
stuff?
if you'd like an opportunity, yes, but let's just get through this, all right? So, how do you want that to be pursued? Or how are you suggesting that be pursued? Now or in a interim period?
Well, I'd like to move the meeting forward. I want this to do, this is not just a debate. There has been a lot of dialogue by Mr. Ducrain and Assistant Director Andy with the homeowner. I just like just to maybe open the conversation just once, hear what they have to say. It's black or white, and then we move forward with the vote.
All right. So, anything else on this subject before we?
Is that fair?
Commissioner Ackerman has directed a question to you and the homeowners, and if you wouldn't mind coming forward and responding to him.
Hello again.
Just for the record, please, just introduce yourself.
My name is Allison Hurd, and this is Louis Fish. We reside at 1 Hutchinson Street. One of the points that we just wanted to make was, tonight it's been said a couple of times that the proposal that was given to us was to move back the fence 3 feet or to move the corner back 3 feet. Both Lou and I were present that day during the conversation. That's not the proposal that was laid out for us. The proposal that was laid out for us was to move that stretch of the fence back 4 feet, the entire stretch of the fence.
Or to have just the corner moved back 8 feet.
Right, so
So that was not at all what was
presented
presented
to us.
tonight.
So it's something completely different. Also, just to clarify, because there's been some talk about why our picket fence is different than our 6-foot fence. The reason for that is because we were enclosing 2 separate spaces. One of them was our backyard, the other one was a garden fence, and that's the only reason why you see a variance with one being closer to the road than the other. It was no intention to try to encroach or get more yard space. We were just simply trying to enclose the garden, which is why it's in a little bit closer.
You get the point, though, that people are making about the fence company. It's pretty hard to believe that they would.
It is, and I think our concern, Mayor, is that it wasn't just Gate City that gave that quote to us. When we talked to 3 of the most reputable gate companies, they all said the same thing, which is 5 feet, which is why we did not question it further. That, the fact that the town's website did not lead us to believe anything different.
Let me just be clear. No one has suggested that you should have understood this after talking to the fence
Yeah.
company. They're suggesting, what's been suggested is, come on, the fence company knew all about this.
Well-
Why didn't they talk to the city engineer? That's what.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could answer to that, you know, Mr. Duggan has actually made a statement that kind of answers that he's aware that these fence companies are not aware of the regulations, and hence now, because of our issue, they've now started going out to fence companies and talking to them about the regulations, because as Commissioner Pappas has said, the right-of-way is so arbitrary that nobody knows what it is. Mr. Duggan mentioned that the right-of-way since the 1970s has been 50 feet. Our neighborhood was built in 1957, and at that point, he himself just said that the right-of-way was 35 to 40 feet. So I put into great question where the right-of-way is, because he's using 1970s standards, and we're talking about a neighborhood that was built in 1957.
Well, he wasn't really
So-
saying that he really believes that they don't understand this. He's just re-clarifying with them. The point there, these fence companies, in fact, this fence company has been required to move other fences because they're in the right-of-way. They know all about this.
When we spoke to
This
them.
isn't like they just fell off the truck and
Well-
figured out, oh my God, there's a city right-of-way. They've been
These
doing
are
this for
recent
50
issues.
years, right?
These are recent. When we spoke with
issues.
them, they said they've recently had to
So-
move a few of them, that it has just come up, that it was not, it's not like for years they have this history of having to move fences. When we had them, when we spoke with them and asked them for the letter that we had presented at the last meeting that we spoke at, we asked them about this, and they said, yeah, we did have one about a month ago. I think they said that we did have to move, and I think there was another one a few weeks before that. So it's more recent.
I think you should take that with a grain of salt, all right? Because I know of other cases.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm just, all I'm trying to do is make it clear that no one is really suggesting that you should have done anything other than rely on the fence company, which you did. And they're suggesting that the fence company, they believe, you know, we believe is well aware of these issues for many decades of working with them. But now, but I didn't mean to cut you off. You were talking. Do you want?
I do have a couple of other points
All
to
right, well,
rebut what.
Please go ahead. And
Thank-
then Commissioner Tease has a question for you.
Thank you. So one of the things that Mr. Duggan mentioned was about the 20 miles an hour coming around that corner. That is a 90-degree corner. Nobody's coming around that corner at 20 miles an hour. You have to take that corner at 15 miles an hour or sometimes less.
To the point where neighbors have said, why don't we have stop signs at this intersection?
Right.
And what our understanding is, Nashua has replied to them, there's really not enough traffic for it. And it's a tertiary road, so there isn't really a lot of traffic. And when we were meeting with Nashua, when they were offering their proposal, pushing it back 4 feet or the corner back 8 feet, we sat there for half an hour. At the end, I said, okay, so we've been here for a half an hour. Not one car has driven by here. And they said, oh, yeah, we noticed that too. So, I mean, it's not a heavily traveled road at all.
In addition to the line of sight issue, you know, we still have they're just, you know, photocopies, but we still have those photocopies of the brush and the trees and everything else that were there, which encroached into the street 3 to 4 feet, not just to the street line, but into the street 3 to 4 feet. Our fence is now about 6 feet back from the road, so our estimation is that we've actually increased the line of sight for our neighbors by approximately 10 feet. In addition, we talk about the pedestrian travel on the street. If there was brush and trees that encroached into the street 3 to 4 feet, that means that pedestrians would have to walk in the middle of the street going down Huey Street. Now, because of where our fence is, and there's grass along that fence line, now pedestrians can walk off the street, on our property, and not have to worry about the safety issues. We're talking a lot about safety on a tertiary road that we've drastically improved.
And if you remember, the first time we were here, one of our neighbors, Sandy Belknap, had accompanied us. And she actually was speaking to this specific issue that I know is kind of near to your heart, Commissioner Pappas, that she had specifically called the town about the brush, that it was encroaching so much. Many of this was intentionally planted. Some of it was not, but many of it was. She had called the town and said, it is a danger. It needs to be cut back. I cannot walk my dog. If somebody comes down the road, I have no place to jump off that road with my dog. And Nashua did nothing about it. And it did not get cleaned up till Lou and I moved in, and we took care of all of that.
And by the way, the website for the city has not been updated.
Yeah.
I checked it as of yesterday. It still says, as of October, the site is under construction. There has been no action on the city's part to fix the website and inform residents of the regulations.
Commissioner Tease.
Lewis and Allison, thanks for coming again.
Thank you very much.
I commend you for what you've done to that property. I saw the before and after pictures. I think you've done a nice job, and you're good people with good intentions.
Thank you.
You know, before us today is something that would impact you tremendously.
Yes.
But it also impacts tremendously 90,000 other people that are not in that neighborhood. We've got to think about all those folks. And I think about, you know, if my son or daughter lived in that neighborhood, and if it was them that came around that corner. And candidly, I feel, we want to resolve this fairly, but I think if we were to vote right now, it'd probably be denied. So I'm going to suggest that I'm going to propose a motion to table this and ask for 60 days for you folks to work with the city engineer and to report back to us in February. And then we'd vote permanently in March. I'm nervous about the liability that would be imposed upon the city, but I'm also mindful of, you know, the burden that's on you as well. I want to provide fair amount of time to get it done.
We appreciate that, and just to speak to the liability issue, we actually have 2 attorneys that we're currently working with, and then one of them had spoken specifically to this issue and said that he was a little confused because the neighbor who had called had specifically asked for just a blind driveway sign, and that's all she was really asking for. And he said that if that's what the neighbor was asking for and Nashua erected said sign, they were doing their due diligence. They were doing what that neighbor had asked for, and that should absolve any liability. And furthermore, everything that this board does as far as ruling on any sorts of variances, exceptions, anything along those lines is in fact then would be a liability issue. So he was a little confused as to why this one seemed to be such like a hot button topic, because, you know, he said they rule on all sorts of variances that deal with fences and this and that, whatever. Why all of a sudden is yours on this back road when you have pictures of other properties that are in the exact same situation? Why is all of a sudden Hutchinson such an issue we the board is being kind of scared a little bit that you're personally responsible for this? So again, we don't object to the sign being erected if that's what the neighbors asked for, and that would work for everybody. Like, put the sign up, we're okay with that.
This is a huge safety issue for us, and that's one of the things that we're most concerned about in Public Works. We're always looking out for the safety of all residents, and in this instance, as in any instance, this was brought to our attention. So that's why we're here right now. We certainly didn't hunt you down. It was brought to our attention that there was a sight distance issue. Your neighbor has expressed concern about being able to back out of the driveway. As Attorney Bolton said, we're also concerned about other people that might be driving down your street, your other neighbors that could possibly hit your neighbor as they're trying to back out of the driveway. And it's also sort of about treating everybody equitably. You know, we can't have a situation like this that's brought to our attention and not respond to it. There was an ordinance that was violated. We have to make sure it's safe, and we can't I think we have to be very careful about allowing obstructions in the city right-of-way that create a liability for the city and a safety concern for our residents. So that's why we're here.
Forgive me for being bold, but isn't that what the city did multiple years ago when they ignored the request to clean the brush and, you know, prior to us owning the property? They didn't act then.
I'm sorry, I don't have any knowledge of that.
And we also have pictures that, and we had brought this up on our first meeting of I think it's Mead Street, where it is almost an exact same situation, where there's like a driveway, there's a 6-foot fence right there, so 5 feet off, and we brought it up, and not to my knowledge has anything been addressed with that property that has been brought up in these meetings.
It just seems quite unfair that we're being held to, you know, you're drawing the line in the sand and saying, from this point forward, we're going to do this and we're going to hold residents responsible. But your line in the sand is after we've already put up our fence. So why aren't all of the other residents being held to the same standard?
There are 3 other fences that have been brought to our attention recently, 2 very recent, I think on Fowle Street. Is that correct? And we requested that both residents move their fences, and they did. So
Well, as it pertains.
you're not being singled out. And there's also another one on Ferry we asked the resident to move the fence out of the city right away because there was a site distance issue. So when they're brought to our attention, we do look at them, and we have to make a determination whether there's a safety issue.
And that's fair. You know, but as far as the offer that was presented to us, moving that corner back to allow our neighbors 3 more feet of visibility at an angle to go to the gate that's installed on that same side, that hadn't been what was proposed to us, but that would be an amicable solution for us.
If we can get Gate
Provided that we
City,
can get Gate City to move that corner of the fence, you know, we would concede to that.
3 feet is
That the-
fine.
So now there's a fact,
Andy, do you want to speak to that?
so there's a disagreement about what even you discussed, but anyway. Do you mind if he takes the
No, no.
microphone for a second? You know Andy, I think.
Yes.
Andy Patrician, Assistant Director. The original agreement I actually sat in that driveway, and the original agreement that me and Lauren had talked to them about was to go the half a panel in and to go back 2 panels. That was the original agreement, because from sitting in that driveway, you could actually get a better sight distance for that person to be backing out of their driveway. I don't know if maybe we got confused somehow, but that was the original.
Well, in panels, so.
A fence panel.
6-foot panel, correct?
8 feet wide.
8 feet wide.
Top panel would be 4 feet back.
Yeah, and that's, so, I don't know.
4 feet back.
Yeah, I don't know. I think when we were talking panels at their home, I think we were thinking it was a 6-foot panel. So that's where the 3-foot came in. But it still would have had to go back 2 panels in order for you to cut the corner for that resident to back out.
2 panels in what direction?
2 panels towards the corner.
And then how much down the driveway?
Down the neighbor's driveway, we were proposing go halfway in, which was 4 feet.
So 4 feet down the neighbor's driveway?
Yes.
To the, starting 2 panels towards Hutchinson.
Yes, towards the corner.
Angled to 4 feet down the driveway of the neighbor.
Yes.
Is that what you understood?
It wasn't at the time. I thought that they had said.
They had
it would be
specifically said 4
1
feet up
full
to the
panel in if we went to the angle, but 4 feet if we went the entire length of Huey Street.
Right.
Which, you know, where is a lot of our hardship, because that would be a lot to move. But if they're talking about coming in 4 feet along the neighbor's driveway and 16 feet, 2 panels to the gate, that would be more amicable to us. Again, provided that Gate City is willing to do the moving of the fence. Because otherwise it's a significant financial burden to us.
Do we all understand what that means?
Commissioner Pappas.
It's, panels and feet, it sounds like there may have been apples and people may have been comparing apples and oranges, and there may be a misunderstanding, because it sounds like both sides really made an effort to try to work things out. And I think that, you know, I think the board really feels strongly about safety, and we also want to be fair to you, and I think the city staff, and I think the city attorney has just, you know, done yeoman service. You know, as much as this is the second time, and we are devoted, and we've put the time up to it, I think that this can be hammered out, but I would suggest that people are clear. We should talk about, you know, go with a measuring tape and the panels and the whole bit. And my guess is Gate City Fence will move that, because they have not, this is not a great advertisement for the, you know, for that company. I actually, if the city attorney didn't use the name, I wouldn't have done so, but I would be stunned if they will not move that for you. But I think this can still be worked out, and I know doesn't seem like either side is adverse to trying to come up with a solution. And it seems like it started down at this end, and I feel like everyone here has been reasonable, and that might be a good option.
Commissioner Tees.
I move to table the current request that's before us, and allow the parties 60 days to find an amicable solution to be presented no later than the March Board of Public Works meeting.
Okay. And before does anybody have any comments on that? Before we vote, okay.
I do have a comment.
Commissioner
I do
Ackerman?
think that during this portion of where we get this compromise, we get the the agreement in writing, so that when it comes to us in February, we see it, they see it, and we move forward. And let's move this behind us as quickly as we can.
And there be a very clear drawing, so people know there's no misunderstanding. If there were an agreement, what the agreement is, so we don't get back here and.
Right. And the responsibility to speak to the erector of the fence will be the resident, in my opinion.
All right, so you've got the motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And
Opposed.
Opposed? The issue is tabled until March, the meeting of March, correct? Wasn't that it? March? Thank you very much.
No later than March.
Again for coming in. Thank you for all that are involved, our public works, our residents, our city attorney. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right. We better start enforcing these, because we can't.
There's been an awful lot of time spent on this issue.
Yes. All right, the next thing is a motion regarding residential and commercial wastewater.
I'll move to approve the residential and commercial wastewater service permits and fees as submitted.
Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We have an informational item, which I think is going to be addressed by the director.
Actually, the city
Oh,
engineer.
is it going to be this, Mr. Dukran?
Thank you, Steve Dukran, city engineer. The first information item is about paving our main streets. Our paving program this year consists of putting out 2 contracts. One that will address primarily what we call arterial roadways, and the second will be for what we call the local or residential streets. So the first list is for the arterial roads, and we're trying to make a bigger effort this year to address these busy streets. Just driving around, you'll see that some of them are deteriorating much more quickly than expected. And if we don't get a handle on these, if we don't catch up with these will fall into a repair category that we simply can't afford. So we have to get out there and do something. So we listed them out: Elmwood Street, Canal Street, East Hollis Street, Kinsley, Lake, Main Dunstable Road, Pine Hill Road, Spitbrook Road, and West Hollis Street, portions of the entire length of these streets. Some of them will need utility work, Liberty Utilities and Pennachuck. So they have the list. They are going to put their program together to address their utilities. And so these streets may be delayed towards the later part of the year, hoping that the utilities can get them done. Like us, they have limited budgets, and they have priorities as well, whereas the paving is our priority because of the condition of the street. It may not be the highest priority for their older utilities, but we'll have to work with them and try to get them to shift things or move things along more quickly. We're hoping that they will be out there even this winter so they can get a head start. We have to wait to see if they will do so. Just to mention Kinsley Street, a portion that we had planned on doing last year got pushed towards the end of the year because, again, utility work, sewer work that's yet not done. And Liberty Utilities just told us that they have some work that they'd like to do between Main and Elm Street. That came as a surprise. So our hope was to get the sewer work done during the winter and pave as soon as the weather allows us in the spring. But Liberty wants to go in there and do a section of pipe too, so that may push the final paving a little bit later. So that's the first item. Should I go right into the second one?
Yes.
So the second list, a lot of streets we are trying to do. I think 11 miles of the local roads. These we haven't seen any real issues regarding utilities. These have been cleared at this point to move forward, and so we'll try to cover most of these. I wanted to point out that Pennachuck Waterworks had done a lot of main replacement and connection replacements in the southern part of the city, and they were supposed to restore these streets to the extent as required by law, but we have chosen some of these streets to rebuild these streets entirely, curb to curb. So instead of just having the Pennachuck Trench redone and then overlaying the street curb to curb, we could actually rebuild the street and get a better product, a more lasting pavement. And so Pennachuck has contributed to our paving funds. We got $1.5 million or so to do these streets, and in the end, it's in the city's benefit to do this. So that's it. If you have any questions on this, you will see both these projects are out to bid, and we will be bringing them in the month of March for approval. Hopefully we get bids within our budget, but they will come here for approval, and hopefully we can get all these 22 miles plus the leftover streets from last year all done this year.
So there's how much left over from last year?
We probably have like 5 miles, I think.
All right, Commissioner Ackerman.
Yep, just a very quick question. Thank you very much. Excellent report. Is the rating system that the city did 6 months, a year ago, determine whether or not we do a 2-inch mill and overlay or a 3.5? Is that what drives that?
That is true.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And mill and overlay is also affectionately called mill and fill?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. There's a distinction between mill and fill and mill and overlay. Usually a mill and fill is that you don't really mill the entire width of the street. You mill the bad pieces.
Mill and fill's more of a repair rather than
Yes.
a complete, it's a patch
Right.
of a section.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? Commissioner Pappas.
Just, you probably are not gonna be able to answer it, but just time frame. Had a lot of people really antsy about Kinsley Street.
We know that.
Spring.
I'm sure you,
Yes, we
aware.
know that.
Do you-
But
Do you have
yeah.
a sense as to,
The utilities keep surprising us, and you have to wonder, how do you say no to a gas leak? You know, who would say no? Think about Columbia. So, yeah. So they, like I said earlier, they want to do now between Main and Elm. And, you know, they tell you it's the PUCs after them to do this, the leaks are getting worse, and we have to allow
They
them.
have finished in Kinsley, right? The gas company has finished in Kinsley?
Well, towards the western side, towards the turnpike, they're all done. And we thought they were out of the street altogether.
What about Main Street to,
That just came up within the last couple of weeks.
there's another leak over there?
They have a pipe that's leaky. So we're pushing to get them in there right away, so they can have us ready to pave in as early as possible. But that's yet to be seen.
Commissioner Pappas.
and then just one more question. I can't remember if I had asked you this question or the director, that there were a couple of concerns. I know Concord Street got just done late, just because if that's how it worked out. And it looks like there's like maybe I don't want to say if a buckle or a seam, and there may be repair work. Are they gonna, how are we gonna follow up on that? And
Okay, so.
make sure that the paving, I assume it's a paving company.
Yes, the paving company, Newport, did this work, late in the year, and the quality of the work south of Cortlandt Street is not the best. There are seams, there are some bumps, and so on, and they attribute that to the time, the temperature.
Right.
They were trying to compact. They weren't getting the mix as fast as they wanted and all of that. And so there is a little bit of a debate going on between us and the contractor. So far, he said he can do some repairs, some minor repairs. We're asking for more. So we really haven't had the opportunity to sit down and really resolve this, hash this out. I think we'll have to wait for better weather where we can all go out there and together walk the street and figure out really what is acceptable, what's not. But yes, you have observed correctly there are some issues.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Mr. Dukran. We'll now move to Parks and Recreation. Item A.
I move to award 2019 City 4th of July fireworks celebration contract to Atlas Pyro Vision Entertainment of Jaffrey, New Hampshire, in the amount not to exceed $17,500. Funding will be through 177 Parks and Rec, Fund General, Account Classification 55 Other Services.
Okay. Discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item B.
Move to extend the current contract with the United States Services of Haverhill, Massachusetts through December 31, 2019 for the sum of $13,413.94. Funding for the contract will be through Department 177 Park and Recreation Fund, General and Trust, Account Classification 54 Property Services.
Discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Now on to solid waste. Item A.
I'll move to approve change order number 6 to the contract with Northeast Earth Mechanics, Inc. to continue construction of residential setback barrier wall in the Phase 2 landfill in the amount of $165,655. Funding will be for Department 168 Solid Waste Fund Bond Activity Soil Wall.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item B.
I'll move to approve engineering services with Sanborn Head and Associates, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $28,700. for the 2019 gas landfill system expansion. Funding will be through Department 168 Solid Waste Fund Bond Activity Landfill Gas Expansion fiscal year 19.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. On to wastewater, item A,
Move to approve the user warrants as presented.
discussion. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
I'll move to approve purchase of the 2017 VACCON combination jet vacuum sewer cleaner from Atlantic Machinery of Silver Springs, Maryland, for the contract price of $395,699.63. Pricing for the purchase will be off of Sourcewell contract. Funding will be through Department 169 Wastewater Fund, WRF.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. On to personnel. Item A,
I'll move to accept the retirement of Bernie Basha, effective January 1st, 2019, January 4th.
comments, discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Now, we have a non-public session regarding personnel,
Commissioner Ackerman has the,
I move by roll call that the board go into non-public session pursuant to RSA 91-A3, Section 2B, the hiring of any person as a public employee.
and there needs to be a roll call on that motion. Is there any discussion to begin with? If none, could you please call the roll?
Mayor Donches,
Yes.
Commissioner Ackerman,
Yes.
Commissioner Pappas,
Yes.
Commissioner Moriarty,
Yes.
Commissioner Tease.
Yes.
All right. I think we have to,
oh, actually, you can stay, John. You're the only one. Oh, you have to go, and then you can go back. Everybody has to go, and then you, yeah. Okay. Yep. Do you want us to continue, or do you wait? Okay.
Hi. Are you coming back after the non-public, or?
Yes.
You are? Okay.
Shouldn't be that long. We won't be, yeah, we won't be long. The mayor said to continue, so.
But we usually do the not, I always thought we did, because Ernie's always here during
Someone's
the,
gonna come and destroy it, they're gonna want,
Do we usually have personnel
I
after
could be
administration?
wrong, it's no big deal.
because it's
I mean,
stolen right away.
We probably
I
should.
think
then.
we've changed it several times,
Now
but,
Let's
putting
put
a person
personnel
now,
after
we're allowing-
administration next time.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's no big deal, but I think he enjoys the, watching the.
I'd like to move by roll call to seal the minutes of the Board of Public Works non-public meeting of January 31st, 2019, until such time as the majority of the board votes that the purpose of the confidentiality would no longer be served.
And is this by roll call? Yes. Would you please call the roll?
Mayor Donches?
Yes.
Commissioner Ackerman?
Yes.
Commissioner Pappas?
Yes.
Commissioner Moriarty?
Yes.
Commissioner Tease?
Yes. Motion passes.
Oh.
All right, so we've got the administration is next.
So before I can get into my report, John stayed in order to give us an update on our brine program.
Oh, excellent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nope, there's one more thing, John. I apologize. Thank you, Diane. Mayor, there's one more thing under administration that you were going to speak to quickly.
Keep the tie on.
Yes.
Stay right there.
Yes. So John is going into the director's report.
We have to, yeah. we have to do
Yes.
that.
So the Finance Committee passed, or the Board of Aldermen passed amended the ordinance regarding the minimum contract amount that needs to be approved. And they increased the amount from $10,000 to $25,000. And this passed at the last Board of Aldermen meeting. And one of the main motivations was to reduce the amount of paperwork that has to be done leading up to, for the approval of a contract. I think the purchasing manager had some statistics, but I think roughly by moving from $10,000 to $25,000, you have very little effect on the total dollar amounts because these tend to be smaller contracts. And maybe it's in the single numbers in terms of the total dollar amount that is no longer needs approval. But on the other hand, it reduces the paperwork by 33% or something. I mean, it's a significant amount of change in the paperwork. And it's particularly burdensome for Public Works because most of the Public Works contracts are very large, and they're the most contracts. So, if something is, $15,000, which for Public Works is pretty routine, they don't have to, the staff doesn't have to go through, a couple different approval processes. In addition, 25 is very typical for other communities. Manchester, they surveyed, purchasing managers surveyed, and we were the lowest of anyone they found.
Manchester doesn't have any approvals, actually. They just have their budget. As long as they're within their budget, they don't need any approvals from any boards.
But some of these other towns, Salem and the like, they do have a threshold that
Yep.
it tends to be 25,000. Commissioner Tease.
So how would this impact us? Would it mean that we'll perhaps have fewer motions? Okay.
I mean, for example, Parks and Recs, both motions were under 25, so we wouldn't have.
We wouldn't see
gotten-
it.
Yeah,
Got it,
we wouldn't have
okay.
seen those.
Yes, exactly.
Just a follow-up question.
Commissioner Ackerman.
Yes, what if it was $14,000 on top of something that was less than 25,000? Would then it come before the board? Like an amendment?
I think if it were
Yes.
25,000 on top of something that had already been approved, it's gonna come to you.
Yes, if the cumulative total was 25 or over, it would come to you, yes.
Fair enough.
Yes,
Okay, that's fine.
absolutely.
Just curious, thank you.
That was a good question.
Any other
This
discussion?
is gonna help us enormously. It's so much paperwork that's created, so,
It's already in effect.
yes.
Yeah.
It was approved Tuesday?
I think it was the last meeting, I believe, so it was, it was,
A week ago Tuesday?
yeah, it was last week. It was a week ago, 9 days ago.
You're just spending under an approved budget, and previously you're kind of giving us warning, you're spending the money, anything over 10,000, now it's just anything over 25, right?
Right.
Yeah.
all the things that come before you under an approved budget. I mean, not, you know, you're not asked to approve items that aren't budgeted,
I'd make the number 50.
unless
Oh,
you can't, you know, there needs you would have to approve any transfers. Okay, next, director's report.
John, you want to give us an update on Brian?
Very excited.
Good evening, everybody. John Ibarra, Superintendent Streets. So the past few months in the BPWs, even the ones I haven't attended, I've included in the department report for streets kind of a progress or status of our brine making construction project. As much as I was hoping to come tonight and say it was fully operational, we experienced a setback. Though everything is in place, we had an initial startup date 2 weeks ago. We had the Henderson rep. The picture here in the first slide is the facility looking down on it from the roof of the street department. That is what's housing the brine making components. The hopper is outside in between the tank farm, which will be the storage for the product. That's right directly behind the street department. On the 16th, we had scheduled the Henderson rep to come out and do the initial startup, do a final walkthrough, make sure everything was ready to go. And we got to about noontime, checking all the valving and the plumbing. When we went to fire up to run the motors that would actually circulate, and the drivers in the control cabinet weren't compatible with the motors. Come to find out that was on Henderson. We expect that was shipped today. They're giving us a whole new control panel, and the Henderson rep will be back out next week, tentatively Tuesday, but next week to install the panel at their expense and try for an initial fire up and start making some brine. That is the rep there in that photo. You're looking at all the nuts and bolts where the valving and the control panel is inside the facility. This is the extensive plumbing that comes off of that machine. Goes through the building and out to the tank farm, and it goes to 3 independent truck fill stations where the drivers will be able to back up, program the truck code, how many gallons they need. All they'll have to do is hook the hose on the saddle tanks, and it'll automatically send what they need. It's a really neat setup, and love to give you guys a tour over there someday. This is looking away from the building towards the tank farm. On the right is the backside of the hopper. That's where I like to say all the magic's going to happen. That's where they're going to dump the rock salt in, and then you activate the pump. It's going to circulate the water through the rock salt, creating the brine. It's measured to a 23% solution and then sent out to the tank farm for storage. This is Eric Gingras, our wastewater electrician. We built this whole project with street and wastewater and actually school department staff. Gary Connors was kind enough to work with me and supply Lyle Samard. He did all the plumbing for the facility, which kept our costs down. And Dave Boucher, wastewater superintendent, was able to part with Eric. We had to work around their schedules. Obviously, wastewater has to stay operational, but every time I could get him out, he'd come out and work on this for us. That control panel he was working in that slide, that's the component that Henderson is rebuilding and sending so we can program that machine. That'll be replaced next week. Okay. That is the hopper. That's where the rock salt's added and fresh water's added and circulated back to the pumps and then sent to the farm. That's the guys doing the return lines and the fresh water feed, and that control box down in the front in the lower portion of the picture, that's one of the truck fill stations where a driver will pull up, hook up the hose, program his truck number in, and how many gallons. And that is the tank farm with the 3 truck fill stations, one on either end and one in the middle. And that's it. I just wanted to kind of bring you up to speed a little bit on that. We've been anticipating it. I thought for sure we'd be making brine by now, A few delays, holidays, a few weather events, and then this debacle with Henderson. But they're standing behind their product. I had one other failure when we were circulating water. That hopper, the stainless box, had a few leaks. They're also assuming the expense of a certified welder to come out here and make those repairs with some reinforcing gussets. So that'll all take place shortly. Any questions?
Just a real fast one. Water freezes, so after you're done a storm, does water still stay in those tanks over there, or do we just purge?
That will be brine, so it'll be mixed at a 23.3% salt solution, and we will have circulation going on. So that will not freeze. The plumbing is phenomenal. When you come out, I'll walk you through it. They have blow-offs. The compressor shoots purges of air to blow out any standing water. We had Lyle built in some gravity drains. So we can drain everything. It's amazing. It's a nice project.
You know, Superintendent, it makes me nervous looking at those pictures of the control panels being exposed, though, 24/7, all year long. Can't we have some kind of cover
Yeah,
for those?
we didn't get there. I had the same thought, actually. They are a weather-type panel, but yes, I intend to enclose those. Yep. It was push, push, push to get it up. I wanted to make brine earlier. Fortunately, we've had a slow winter. We've only had, maybe, like this last event, I would have probably put liquid down if we had it. Some of the stuff was too cold to actually use it, though we could have pre-wet in some of our pre-treating events. So I missed a little bit of action, but fortunately it's been slow and hasn't hurt us too much.
Commissioner Pappas?
Yep.
So usually by like March or April, we tend to have a lot of, we tend to have events where it's more of an icy issue when sometimes it's warm, sometimes it's cold. Do you think we'll be able to use it at all this year, like by like
Oh, yeah.
maybe
Oh, yeah.
March? Okay.
I'm anticipating next week.
Oh.
If we hadn't had these failures on the components, basically on Henderson, we would have been making brine for 2.5 weeks already.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just
Commissioner Ackerman.
one quick follow-up. So with the leakage of the device that they're doing, are they gonna extend the warranty on that? They're gonna put,
So we have a full support from them. The technology that's there, they are a support network for us. He is programmed into that machine so he can troubleshoot it from Indiana. He can tell me what I'm doing. I mean, so anything that goes wrong with it, they're gonna stand behind it, he says. Yes,
but it arrived with leaks. The device arrived with leaks.
that's correct.
And they're doing a retrofit. Are they gonna extend the warranty as a result of tampering?
He said he was staying behind it,
He'll stay behind the original warranty, or is he gonna extend?
behind his product, period.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments?
Just so you know, it's a stainless hopper. There's not really anything technical going on there. So they're gonna reinforce it with some gussets and some stainless weld. But yes, he did assure me that they would stand behind it. Any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
John was here late dealing with that squall last night, so I'm sure he's
Yeah,
tired.
it's just an annoying amount.
We had the roads looking good, and then that happened.
No, they're still, they've been in great shape. Thank you.
Nice fluffy snow.
Good night, everybody.
Good
Night.
night, sir.
Good night, John. So the first picture here is a sewer main replacement on Chase Street that was done by Northeast Earth Tech. This is about approximately 850 feet of sewer that will be replaced. The original concrete sewer was constructed in 1885, so it was time.
We got our money's
It
worth.
was time. This is new city sidewalk that was installed in December at 35 Canal Street. And normally we wouldn't pour sidewalks this late, but it was part of the ADA ramps as improvements to the property by BAE. We're very excited to announce, the mayor
That's
on
nice.
Sunday announced that we received a Transportation Alternative Program grant for Lock Street. And it's $800,000, and we're going to be adding sidewalks, bike lanes, trees, and traffic calming measures. So we're very excited about this project. Neighbors came out to hear the announcement, and they're very excited. And this will be a really great improvement to this neighborhood. It'll also include the potential of making Lock and Whitney both one-way instead of two-way, so that we can make these improvements. A lot of this was driven by safety. We can't effectively clear these sidewalks right now because there were so many obstructions and they're narrow. And I'm sure you've all seen children. We have a safe route for them to walk up Summer. They don't do that. As we all know, kids will follow the path of least resistance, so they tend to go right down Lock and walk in the street, and it's a very unsafe situation. So really excited to get this project underway. It's going to take a little time because there's still a number of hoops because it's a grant. But we hope by October of 2020 we'll have the improvements made. So, did you want to add anything to that? Pretty exciting project.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was very excited to read that.
So we talked a little bit earlier about Eversource and the trimming that they were doing. It was brought to our attention by some residents that were very concerned. One of them was on Raymond Street, and we immediately, Kim Kleiner, the mayor's chief of staff, immediately called a meeting with Eversource. We met with them. We told them of our concerns. We have asked them not to trim any more trees or cut any more trees on Raymond, Cortlandt, and Tolles for now. And actually one of the trees that we just planted ended up getting cut down. So we were very concerned about that. Eversource was very responsive to come to their defense. They have a critical network of power lines that they need to keep clear. They're required by the PUC to do that, and also they want to make sure we don't have any power outages here in Nashua. So they're trying to do the right thing, but trees can be very sensitive, especially mature, beautiful trees, and they are required to get homeowner permission, even with trees in the city right-of-way. The homeowner needs to sign a document saying that they can trim or cut the tree. So homeowners do have a right to say no. Folks should know that. We were a little bit concerned about the form that they were asking residents to sign because we thought it was a little ambiguous and it could be confusing. So we asked them to clarify the forms that they're asking residents to sign. So I think that we also have on this slide, you'll see trees that are low growth. We're going to try to ask residents if you're going to plant near power lines to plant these low growing species. So we don't have that problem. Eversource doesn't want to come in and cut them. So, any questions about trees?
One of the things about Eversource, just for your information, I can think of what tree off the top of my head. I think it's on Stark Street, and I had one in my right-of-way with public service before, and they'll cut off all the limbs, and then leave this horrible tree trunk. And there's one on.
There's one on Lock Street that looks like that.
Yeah, there's one on Lock Street and there's one on Stark Street, because I remember they refused to remove the one, we used to call it the totem pole tree, and then it finally just ka-plunk and it knocked over my fence. But it was a hideous thing to look at, and I'm seeing those throughout the city, and I think if they're gonna take the whole tree, I think it's really unfair to cut off all the things and have people look at that.
Thank you for letting me know that. I'll make
Yes,
sure
I think Stark is one of my, I keep thinking, and you can see there's a big hole in the middle, and Lock, is it Lock, maybe there might be one on Tolles too,
There's one on Lock near that red house.
Yeah. I don't know if that was public, or,
Yeah, it's been there a long time.
yeah.
But if it's near the power line, it's horrible.
We checked out how much it would cost to turn that into a sculpture, to have someone come in with a power saw and turn it into something like it's like a bird or, but it was like $8,000 or something. So nothing has been done yet. But, anybody that wants to, contribute to that cause.
Get Paul Shea on it to do a GoFundMe page.
We have a lot of winter activity continuing in Nashua. The cold weather's not slowing folks down. On the left is the bridge near
beautiful
the
pictures.
Coliseum Ave entrance. And on the right is a sledding at Roby Park, which is very popular.
It's a beautiful picture.
Yeah. And we are finally making ice with the cold temperatures. On the right is the ice rink at Roby Park. In addition to Roby, we do have skating at the Legacy Playground and at North Common. BD Basketball, which is the largest rec program in the state, has reached its mid-season already, if you can believe it. And the weather's been very good. We haven't had to reschedule any games yet, which is great. This is the overflow bridge in Mines Falls, just showing the beauty of that. Located on the Nashua River near the Mill Pond Conway Arena. We received our new grader at the street department. Very excited about that. That's going to be a very useful tool for us, but for both plowing and for grading roads and any fields or soccer fields that we're trying to build and that sort of thing. And that was purchased with the part of the 1.3 million that we received from the state that the governor gave back to communities. So that was a really great thing. Yeah.
Purchase.
We had our first big storm of the season on January 20th, which was hard to believe. This is operations on Broad in Amherst. This is a new grinder that we received from wastewater. This helps us to grind up rags and plastics and other things before they make their way through the process. It's located at the bottom of the digester. We've been doing all sorts of miscellaneous plumbing repairs at wastewater, including new faucets in the laboratory and a new eye wash station in the wet well. Just wanted to highlight some of those things because it's a very caustic environment, so we're constantly having to replace just sort of routine things like that. We had, you probably remember, on January 24th, all the flooding that we had. Of course, the ground's frozen. We have snow on the ground, so there was just nowhere for water to go. So we had some problems, but our crews did a really good job of trying to keep everything flowing. But that's probably the worst thing you can have happen in the winters, to have all that rain.
Yeah.
It just has nowhere to go. These are new. Our compactor has new teeth on the wheels. This is something that we want to always replace the teeth and keep the teeth in good shape so that we don't have any problems with the wheels, because otherwise then we're replacing wheels, which is a lot more expensive. We have the 2019 hazardous waste collection schedule already out, and most of them will be, of the dates will be at the street department this year, with the first one starting on April 20th. And we'll update you as those come along. The Four Hills landfill will be closed on Monday, February 18th in observance of President's Day, so trash that week will be delayed a day. I think that's it. Any questions? Yes.
I just wanted to point out, I think the department's doing a great job on the social media presence. I think the communications
Thank
are
you.
really good, and if you pass that on to Lauren.
I will. Lauren's doing a great job. We're really lucky to have her.
I also had a question, I should have brought it up in the previous tree discussion. On the Henry Burke Highway, because technically it's east, but north of the bridge as you head towards Concord Street, on the right side on Cabot Road, there's a home, and I'm not sure who took down these trees, but there are a bunch of trees, and it just doesn't look right. It's a pile of tree stumps, and they're not even really cleanly cut there. It looks like a tree maybe fell over and snapped and broke, but my concern is it's kind of getting closer, is close to the road, and I don't know if we should take a look at that just from a safety standpoint.
I'm not aware of that. We'll absolutely take a look.
I think there was a big fire there a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it's horrible looking. I think it's state, if it's on Henry Burke Highway, I don't know if it's state, but it is an eyesore, but I think there was a big fire. It was during, someone threw out a cigarette butt.
Well, no, there were
That's
some
what
fires there that, I think some kids set that they never found, I don't know if that's the same exact space, but just a few of them are
awful, yeah.
close to the road, and I just would hate for somebody to run off the road and.
You know, thank you for bringing
Yeah.
that to my
It is
attention. We'll
awful
definitely look
looking,
into that.
too.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that, so thank you. Sure.
Commissioner Moriarty.
Just a question on that, 800,000 grant that
For Lot
the
3.
city will be receiving for the sidewalks. Will that plan, final plan come before this board for approval?
Yes, it will.
It
Yes.
should. I just
Yes,
wanna make
it
sure
will.
it
It will.
does. Okay.
The only reason I hesitated is that we're also going to have a number of community meetings too before we get to even, close to final design to make sure that there's a lot of neighborhood input too
Great.
on what we're going to do. So there'll be those meetings. We'll certainly let you know when those meetings are too, and then we'll certainly bring it to the board for final approval, yes. One of the concerns that I have, and we're gonna work towards trying to figure out what to do, is I don't wanna have these beautiful concrete sidewalks on one side and then have, what exists on the other side, which is horrible right now, asphalt. So if we can somehow redo the asphalt sidewalks on the other side, or, we'll work with the neighborhood to figure that out, but I wouldn't wanna do that great improvement and then have those horrible sidewalks on the other side, so. So we'll certainly, we're gonna look at that, but we're gonna work with the neighborhood, and they're a very, very dynamic group. They're really involved in their neighborhood. It's pretty neat to see, and they're really excited, so.
So if
It's gonna be a fun project to work through.
So if that's the case, are you gonna try to figure it into the budget this year?
We have the grant, so we'll be using
Oh,
the grant.
okay, grant, okay, for the other, okay, so you're
So-
trying to figure out how to stretch that money?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Yes. Yes, I see what you mean for the other side, yes, yes.
Okay.
We're going to try to,
Now, it's gonna
We-
take a while, because the grants,
right,
they don't come right away. So this is the same type of money. It's called a TAP grant that built the little pedestrian bridge over the canal at the end of Everett Street into Mine Falls. And that took several years after the grant. The next round, a round that was awarded last year, we got money to extend the rail trail to the east, all the way to like Henry Hanger. That will go out to, the design of that's gonna go out to bids, or out for a proposal soon, but you can see that it takes a while to get the money. You've got all these federal requirements, neighborhood input and everything like that, so it takes a while to actually see the end result. But the money is there, so.
No, it's an area that really needs it, I think
Yeah.
it's delighted.
great. And community development, actually, we'll be working with them, and they applied for the grant, and so it's very exciting. I think only 9 communities received
great.
grants, and we were one of 9, so that's pretty neat.
That's neat.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions, or?
All right, have we done commissioners' comments? Any other comments? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And the meeting is adjourned at 7:55.